Hey everybody, welcome to the 29th episode of Into the Rift. I'll be your temporary host on Zarnugan on Twitter. I'm joined by a lovely panel, Razzleplasm from Channel Talk. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well, thanks. Yeah.
The
Hi.
famous Brazil and Korean apologist, Emily. How are you?
Uh,
And today's lucky winner of the awesome static image is Hermit, who gets to be Coach Aaron from EDG. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Awesome. Alright, we're going to be talking about MSI that happened last week, actually. From now, it's Thursday. Um, So it's been a while. It's been able to sit in our heads for a little while, and we get to talk about it now. And the first thing we're gonna jump into is, I guess, the first game. I guess like it's the game that everyone kind of really wanted to watch, aside from the
Mm-hmm.
Bjergsen Baker matchup, which I still didn't buy into. But TSM Fnatic, what happened going in, and what do we do going forward?
well, I think going into this match, obviously the kind of general perception of both of these teams was that TSM was going to be the far more like prepared one strategically. They looked really strong at IM, obviously, another tournament that they had prepared for significantly. And then you have Fnatic, who was at, in EU finals. Those finals were interesting to watch. I watched them.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I can say. Like, I think going out of those two finals, people are going into this thinking, well, Fnatic, they might be the other team besides the international wildcard team to not leave the group stages, whereas TSM is definitely going to be moving forward. But that's not what happened at
I
That
all.
went I went downhill. Yeah. Going into this, I thought this would be the most contested game. I thought the two teams were evenly matched. I actually edged out Fnatic to be able to win out in that sense because of just purely their playstyle, to be honest. I thought their playstyle was a lot messier, brute. Like basically they would force their will efficiently, and they were a team that honestly I thought they could be able to play from behind well enough. Well, I think actually TSM did really well in playing. So honestly, I thought it was going to be a coin toss. Um, but I guess I just favored Fanatics for whatever reason. Maybe,
I was like, come on, own this,
maybe that's
Raz.
just
Like,
my
you're the
maybe.
only one of us that believed in Fnatic.
Honestly, maybe that's just
really,
my
I
bias
remember
winning
Raz's
too.
tweet being hashtag TSM win.
No, I was cheering for them. I just thought that Fnatic was
Okay,
like,
all
yeah,
right, that's
and
fair. Okay.
He called Fnatic on
yeah.
last week's show.
Oh right, he did.
So
Yeah, my bad. Okay.
it was probably something harder to call than the finals. No, it depends.
Raz is so like back and
I'm
forth on this.
so back and forth. That's just how like I thought about going into this, just because obviously we didn't have the international competitions to be able to like value these games and to kind of like properly weigh them. But I just felt like that. So going into it, I was really surprised, obviously, that A, Fnatic was a cleaner team than I thought they would be. They were
Yeah.
really clean in how they were moving around the map. They forced calculated situations. I didn't think that would happen, to say the least. And then we saw TSM that I would say, wasn't themselves mentally. Everyone has been talking about the lane swap they should have done. They knew about the lane. I remember when Jat said that he spoke to, I think it was Lust Boy. No, Loco Doco. The L's. That's just what it is. And yeah, they were like, yeah, we should have lane swapped 100%. And honestly, they're a team that has built a lot of their, I would say, early game success. Even though they're a team that really doesn't, they lack a lot of early game strategies. It comes off of lane swaps.
Mhm.
Like Lust Boy
Yeah.
is able to ward a lot more, and so. Yeah, it just didn't come through for whatever reason. It just I felt they underperformed. That's just what it came down to. So it's interesting to see that how mentality can really form a team and form a matchup. That's what it came down to for me.
All right, I can agree with that. I mean, I also was pretty surprised how cleanly Fnatic was taking objectives in the first like 15 to 20 minutes. That
Hmm.
was just very impressive. Um, but other than that, let's. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was
Yeah, go
I
on.
was I was gonna say I am in EU, and so I see Fnatic a lot, and they're a team I really kind of like look at in that because they shape the EU LCS metagame.
Mhm.
And I really didn't have Fnatic at all in this series, and it's kind of interesting, because even since the Peke and Soaz days, Fnatic was always a team that was said to thrive on chaos. People, the dominate narrative of last season's Fnatic was, they thrive in these chaotic team fights with Gragas knocking everybody around and Kha'Zix and Kassadin picking people off in the solos, and that's kind of how Fnatic was known before the current iteration of their roster. And I just think it's such an interesting thing that they come into this tournament where clearly TSM had preparation issues, and EDG and SKT are like, they're there for 2 days barely, just a couple scrims and just this really super chaotic event. And guess what? Fnatic shows up. So, once again, I think we're seeing a Fnatic roster that really thrives in chaos.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, so other than the first game, what about the group stages in failure? I mean, in general. Sorry. Oops.
Just rant that TSM failed.
I'm sorry. Like as a
Let's talk
TSM fan,
about
since like
that.
near the beginning, it was a failure.
Wow.
It was sad to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I feel like TSM. Okay, so maybe I'm just talking about or just have this in my head because of something else I was researching the other day. But when you have only a specific amount of resources on a team, you have to figure out. You have to have a game plan going in from your coaching staff, being like, okay, we have this set of players. How do they work? What do they do? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Like, does our is our jungler like a particularly aggressive one, or is he more passive? Like, who is the carry? Like, obviously the carry of TSM is their mid laner, Bjergsen. So, like, who's the secondary carry? And obviously TSM has identified that as Wild Turtle, basically because, in my opinion, his positioning is such that he needs help to be relevant later on in stages of the game. So, so obviously something's got to give because you can't give all of your resources to everyone. And the person that gets absolutely no resources is Dyrus. And so looking at the team and looking at their play in NA, they could get away with that because they lane swapped. And I know we touched upon the lane swaps and we can talk about it again as to why we think they did or didn't in terms of how it ties into their preparation. But if a team looking at TSM throughout NA this season, they're like, okay, they're probably going to lane swap, and they give no attention to Dyrus whatsoever. Like, they're not going to do it. So what do? You gank top a lot, and that's what happens. And so I guess if you're looking at addressing the issues in TSM, it's really difficult, and I think it ties into the fact that they might, once they get up against these international teams and like higher levels of competition, they might sometimes struggle with the way that they've kind of trained themselves to allocate resources.
it also doesn't help that when Darius gets camped in these international tournaments, they don't have a swift response to it on the other side of the map. Like, it's 2v1 top lane, and then it's 4v3 in the rest of the map, but they don't do anything. Or they try to, and then they do it poorly. So, either any teams just don't pressure them enough to make that kind of response, or they're just not thinking about it. It's like, okay, Darius hiding in. Alright, let's ward up, buddy.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have said that it comes to, like, certainly I have said it, that it comes to a mentality kind of thing with them, but honestly, they were also caught in a very awkward state with the meta in the sense that when they got Bjergsen, when he replaced Reginald, nothing changed about how they played their play style. The only thing that changed, honestly, was just the skill that came out of the mid lane.
Hmm.
You can really, really, when people said that something about Reginald is that if he didn't do well in lane, then the team failed. Well, that was partially true, but then Bjergsen, his success rate was significantly better. He would win lane, even if he didn't get sent like his junglers help, like either be it Amazing or Santorin, he would find leads on his own. He didn't need jungle help at all. And so their playstyle never changed. It was always pretty much leave Darius on a in an island and pretty much snowball whatever lead you would have in the mid lane, and it would always be off. Well, not always, but the snowball would generally come off like whatever assassin that he was playing, be it LeBlanc, Zed. Um, he's had a lot of routes, but then you'd have this meta in which you want your mid lane on a safer kind of like sustain lane. You can get
Yep.
so he played Cho'Gath, he played. See, I always forget Urgot, I guess.
He played Urgot. He played Ziggs.
Ziggs, and that they're all standard mid laners now. Yeah, they're all standard mid laners, and so what are you going to be able to do with even if you get an advantage? And he didn't obviously. It's actually it's a harder way to it's a harder lane to gank. It's harder to gank. It's not that hard to gank for a Cho'Gath, but it certainly is for a Ziggs. And so it's harder to create a situation now in which you can snowball a lead for mid lane, and even if you snowball for a Ziggs, it's not as effective as an assassin. And so it's now they can't they don't have as many options as they used to. And now that they've lost those options, their weaknesses are a lot more amplified because now they're getting trades that are just completely unfavorable. They're not even making anything off of it. And so it's just weird. It's just really it's a bad meta for TSM on top of them just being at a bad mindset.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's pretty fair. Oh, you have something
Well, I
to
was
say?
just gonna say my only pushback on that was, and I guess this can kind of transition into talking about the rest of the group stages as a whole. You saw other mids picking, like obviously, like you can write off like, oh, it's Westor, like, but like you saw other mids picking Fizz. You saw Febiven picking up Zed and LeBlanc still. So it seems like going through Besiktas, they tried to get energy on Diana or Ari. So those are like the two champions that he does well on. And you saw other teams picking up like Assassin or more like aggressive laning mids. So I guess the question would be, why did TSM decide to step away from that now?
My idea is that they had a poor understanding of like the meta coming into this, and one of the reasons why I believe that is because coming into MSI, I had scrimmed a lot with on the patch, and I saw them leaving Urgot up for their opponents to first pick. And just getting themselves into situations during pick ban that I'm looking at as an analyst and saying like you don't know what you're doing, like you're crippling yourself by making these mistakes. And so I really do believe that they sort of there was a slight shift, but it's kind of a big shift. Like 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, you might have been able to second rotation or third rotation that Urgot. Going into MSI, no chance. Absolutely no chance. That guy's going to be picked up first. First pick, but whatever team, if it's open, he's going to be picked. And so, but that's another thing about the metagame of these tournaments is that sometimes when the first couple days, it's just the teams scrimming against each other, and so you get these weird sub metagames where because they're only playing each other, they have to hide certain things. They don't necessarily know that the team. TSM might not necessarily know that EDG plays Kalista, for example, and so. It's harsh to say that it comes down to TSM not having an understanding of the meta because of that particular factor that is known about tournament preparation in terms of the teams playing each other. But that's what it is. Like they clearly made different decisions about how they thought what they thought the most powerful strategies were, and what would be open in the later rotations of Champion Select.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's yeah, I agree with that. Do you think there's a reason why TSM didn't pick champions like Cassiopeia or Azir? Like, they were pretty. I think they were dominant picks. I didn't look at the percentage or pick number or band rate. Like, I would think Bjergsen would be the kind of mid laner who would be decent, at least Cassiopeia.
As far as I know, I think he plays both of them. So Azir and Cassiopeia, the big problem that you have when you pick them is that you run into assassins. And so one thing that is kind of figured out now by the Koreans is that if you ban Lulu LeBlanc, then Cassiopeia and Azir are open all the time. And Lulu LeBlanc is like a band combination that not a whole lot of NA and EU teams have caught on to. They'll either not ban the Lulu or they won't ban the LeBlanc, depending. Because I don't know what it is, but there's just not a whole lot of Western mid laners who play both Lulu and LeBlanc to like full carry potential.
Mm-hmm.
Like Lulu is a hero that there's a lot of dynamic there. Like she can really fall behind early in the laning phase. And one thing we saw at MSI is Lulu doing really poorly because she had she just has this very passive early game. She can't really do anything to level 6, and then even at level 6 she can't really do anything till level 9. And she just kind of has to like push and farm and push and farm and push and farm, and then group up with her team, use her speed buff and her wave clear to get a team advantage. And that's a playstyle that's very difficult for the Western players to really like latch onto because there's no immediate reward. And especially Western assassin players, they really want that immediate reward of like LeBlanc.
Yeah.
So if you're going to ban one of those two, you ban LeBlanc. And there aren't that many players still playing Zed, and Zed's the other answer to those two picks.
Okay.
And I think a third thing is that while Azir is a bit of a he's very stalwart. He can mostly survive laning phase. Even if he comes out of laning phase 03, his damage is going to scale really effectively, especially as he levels up, or if he has a jungler like Nunu, that positively affects his damage scaling really, really well. And he's going to be able to use that late game scaling effectively, even if he has a bad laning phase. Cassiopeia gets camped really easily, and that was something that we saw in the TSM versus Fnatic game that wasn't abused. But more importantly, Cassiopeia's excellent, well, not excellent, but like better than average team fight is mitigated by some of these niche champions that we saw pop up at MSI, specifically Alistair, who if Cassio stuns him, he's just going to ult, knock her up, knock her away, and she's not really going to do anything. She might take him out of the fight or put him down to half HP or something, but he's able to instantly diffuse the threat of Cassiopeia. Similarly, he's really good against Kalista. But so what I'm saying is that those answers for Cassio can come from another role. And if you look at Korea, traditionally, Cass is the answer to Azir. And that's one of the primary reasons why she's played.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a very in-depth analysis of I guess, the West's shortcoming in the current meta, or at least the meta that kind of came out of MSI.
And something I really, really loved coming into MSI was the use of Alistair. You definitely put it out there in that sense. I didn't expect it, but I really thought Alistair was a perfect um, pick and answer to not only Cassiopeia, but also Urgot. He can really cancel out Urgot's effectiveness in his ultis. So I like the fact that it was used quite frequently between Wolf and I think
Mako.
Mako as well.
Yeah.
Mako's Alistar was
Mako's
fantastic.
Alistair is absolutely, yeah.
It was beautiful. Yeah. That team had a lot. One thing I loved, and I'm probably going out of like off topic
Just
with
skip
it,
straight
was
to
was
the
Mako.
finals.
Mako is so like Mako all LPL split has been amazing, and I really loved it. And it was just really unexpected because in the LPL you are like accustomed to random roster changes. Just like, oh, okay, so this jungler in M3 is not working out. We're gonna put in Hui, or we're gonna put in. See, there's so many changes. I just don't remember. Dream S to X, Y, and Z. And ADG also made changes from FZZF to Shine, I believe. Or is that the ADG? I just don't know anymore. And so now they.
I thought it was
So I'm
Mouse.
actually just trying to realize it was
for the
Mouse.
first. It was Mouse.
Shine
for the
was Mouse's replacement on ADG. Okay. See, so they put in Mouse. Mouse is fine. Like they still like Def still struggled at lane for the most part. But
Dev's
then
always had laning issues though, so
Yeah.
that's not the fact that he's now like strong in lane as he is right
Mhm.
now. Like I know we are skipping ahead to the finals to EDG,
Yeah.
but like Deft, he was not always like that in Champions. So
yeah. But I just wanted to say that Mako was really, really solid in being able to step up. And just picking up Alistair was just a really good, like, and finding that much effectiveness on him was great. Like, he had a great shot. And I really liked that bit of it.
One thing that we kind of missed was that Alistar is also super awesome against. I'm sure that there are those who will debate me on this, but Alistar turns Thresh and Nautilus lanes into just butter. Like it's like whatever. There's literally nothing you can do as a Thresh or a Nautilus against an Alistar. Like you just like you have to go for their ADC all the time and.
Yeah, I can see that.
Cal can just stop you from doing that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
I agree.
that's another reason why Cal was a really strong pick. And you saw Mako. I'm not sure people really realize this, but you saw Mako picking Annie when he knew that his opponent was looking at Cal, and that plays into the whole kind of counter strategy of how we saw bot lane kind of like change a little bit over this tournament, where Thresh and Nautilus were the two best supports coming into this tournament. Some people brought out the niche pick of the cow, and then that brings you back full circle to Annie, which then goes to Thresh and Nautilus again. So just a little small dynamic that you missed.
All right. We did kind of go off topic there, but I allowed it because it was Mako's amazing rookie split. Moving forward, let's talk about the semifinals.
Judge Nugan is merciful. Thank you. God bless.
Wow, okay. So I guess let's talk about I think one of the more popular series of the tournament, I suppose, Fnatic versus SKT. Now, what we saw was that Fnatic, I think I've heard it described by Emily and Kelsey as baby China or something, or Europe as a whole.
no, it's
no, that was
it's
SK.
like people.
No.
It's like people look at Fnatic as if they're a Chinese team, but they're not
Right,
really
right,
a Chinese
right.
team. That's what it is.
Well, anyway, this Western team took SKT to the 5th match. Now, do you really think that Fnatic is that as good as SKT? Do you think they Well, first of all, this is Bevan's like international coming up party, right? Because everyone thought he was going to be really good, or people thought he was going to flop or whatever. But regardless, there was eyes on Febiven. So tell me for this semifinal, what did Fnatic do right? And then, do you think they're actually as good as SK2?
Well, I remember hearing, and I don't know where from, so, but like the word on the street was that Febiven, like one of the reasons why they ended up playing Faker was because Febiven was actually doing really well against EasyHoon.
Scrims?
And yeah, and so they, like, obviously SKT came into this tournament with the strategy of, we're going to play such mid laner until we get to the point where we swap to set you off guard in your pick spans or your strategy, and then, you know, that will win us a best of 5.
Right.
What happened in the Fnatic series is obviously Febiven showed that he's like incredibly mechanically gifted. I think the story of this series for me was not Febiven, but in the jungle. Because Reignover was someone who I watched in Champions, and he was not great. And he went to...
That's one way to put it.
In fact, I believe, like, one of his nicknames is, like, Game Over or something like that. Like, it was really bad. And, you know, he just didn't look like the best, strongest jungle talent. So when he first went to EU, there was a lot of discussion where they were like, okay, they only got him because he speaks English really well, and they wanted Huni because Huni's a carry top, and obviously Huni was lighting people up in the top lane, and Reignover had these games where he'd, you know, like pick Olaf and kind of like really wouldn't work, and so I think the story of this tournament for me was Reignover, because he's someone who came from Korea. He was known for not being that great. He was known for having some choking issues in terms of like getting into larger games and not being able to deal with the pressure. And he comes to a tournament like this and he shows up big, aside from that one time when Bengi, you know, just totally destroyed him in the last game. So I guess that, like, I found that really interesting because I'd never seen him play that well before. And I feel like if they continue to like push him to, I guess, diversify his jungle thing, like kind of how he goes about doing things,
like his
I think he'll be really, really strong in this next split, which is not something I particularly thought of. And like, you could even see it in the TSM match where, what did they try to do? They just, like, in the group stages, they just banned out Huni, but the problem in that game was Reignover. And the problem in these games was that Reignover was making a huge impact on his lanes, in my opinion.
Yeah. Something I remember I get into a lot of these discussions in terms of jungle talent, I would say. Yeah, jungle talent. And one thing I always say is, and this is why I actually didn't really criticize Santorin as much as other had. I don't like putting blame in general, but generally specifically when it comes to the jungle position, I feel like that is the position that really speaks to team play and understanding as a whole. Like the jungle position is the most difficult position to really judge, simply because it's based on team play, team understanding. Where do people know where to go as a whole? What do people know what to do as a response to certain plays? And I think that he is, like, his success. Maybe it's because of the meta. I know, like, that TBQ and I know that TBQ's definitely been buffed because of it, but I think that he's genuinely good. I think he's genuinely smart. But I think it's possibly speaks to the fact that he is on a team that maybe better prepares.
Really smart team. Yeah.
I don't know. That's a lot of speculation, but I feel like that's just the thing with the jungle position, in which you have to have. It's so relied on lane synergy, and it's so relied on the personalities and how much prepping you do as a whole. It's that that's just where you base their strength off of.
All right.
I work a lot personally with junglers, and so yeah, I'm not a huge fan of. I mean, there's of blaming the jungler at all. There's so many factors going into a jungler's position at a given point in time,
Hmm.
and the fact of the matter is a jungler can't practice his role in solo queue at all,
Yeah.
and so versus somebody like an ADC or a mid laner who can pretty much do most of the same things he does in solo queue in fives. A jungler has much far less time to really play the way that they're going to play on the stage.
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know. I tend to give a lot of slack to the jungler, and I really think that. But I was a critic of Reignover when he came to Fnatic, and
Yeah.
and I
I
didn't
think we all were.
We all
have a whole lot. I didn't have a whole lot of faith.
yeah.
And to be honest, in the regular season, I still felt like, in some regard, he was outperformed by Poro, who isn't even playing in EU right now, and it's just how the way that Fnatic kind of came together in this tournament is in general, like across all roles, is really tremendous, and for specifically the Fnatic versus SKT series, I'm a big fan of how they stuck to what worked for them, rather than playing a counter strategy,
Mhm.
which I think is actually how SKT ended up just losing.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Something with Fnatic, and I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I think MSI coming out of MSI, one thing I definitely learned or valued a lot more was team mentality going into a set, because everybody will talk about potential, everybody will talk about, well, not so much even potential, but the team's strength, that like observed strength. You can see their games and you're like, okay, this team, this is where you can rank this team globally or domestically, and that's where you stick them. But then you put them on a different stage, you put them in different, like a much more pressured situation, and then that's not what they're going to show sometimes. It's their potential, or even just their strength as a whole is diminished. It just based on the mentality that they go into it. And so one thing I really valued a lot more, actually, was Fnatic in how they played their games. For instance, if they saw an option, like if they saw like an opening in which they could start a fight or contest an objective or vision, they went for it all the time. Huni was someone who always went in for a play, and that's just something that's their, I guess, their mentality. But it actually reminded me of Unicorns of Love, actually. A team that I love to shit on, but never like stopped succeeding in their region. And I think the reason for that was because like the massive region for that, there were two sides of like how people viewed Unicorns of Love. They were shit, and no, you don't understand. They're good. You guys don't see it, but they're really good or something. And it's like like I saw a middle ground in the sense that actually one thing that you can really value in Unicorns of Love is the fact that they have no mental cobweb. So they go into a game, they go up against like SK, they go up against well, in their region, of course. And against, like, definitely they go up against TSM and San Jose, and you know what? They don't give a fuck. They'll go in and they'll play. They'll play. Literally, the first game you see them playing, like in San Jose, was Jungle Twisted Fate. They don't care. They don't care. Like, they actually don't. If they see something and if it works in scrims or whatever, they'll play it. they like I remember someone saying that it's because they play for fun. I don't know. Like I don't know their comps, so I can't even make that assertion. All I could say is that they they will always play to their strength, their observed strength. If they play really well in scrims, it translates. Well, if they probably play pretty well in scrims, it translates into their games because into their games you don't, they are not afraid of trying something.
They're very confident in the way they'll play and the way they pick ban.
Yeah, and
I
I
think-
will. Yeah, go on.
I think that that's kind of it's something I've noticed a little bit about. There are two types of teams that are more than two types of teams, but there are teams that are really confident in their blind picks, and Gambit at IEM Katowice, I think it was, is a really classic example of this, recent example of this, where they literally blind pick every role. Like they just don't give a fuck. Like
Yeah.
just don't care. Like
Hmm.
not waiting for the counter. They know what they want and they pick it.
Hmm.
And we're kind of taking Fnatic back to Europe here, and I think one thing that's super interesting about Fnatic after this tournament is that this was Steelback's last appearance,
Yeah.
and Steelback had sort of a coming out party a little bit, but he was like doing all right on the world stage for himself. But it's pretty noticeable, his personal weaknesses. Behind 30 CS at 10 minutes, caught out by multiple skill shots. But I will say that I think Steelback did a great job, and there's a perfect example in this game. I think it's game 3 or 4 or something like that. He plays Urgot, and there's a flash ult on Faker, and just like boom, like that's the fight right there. They win the game.
Yeah.
And so I think for as much shit as Steelback gets, and sure, he didn't look like he really made his mark on the stage, but and he was just a little bit of he was definitely one of the weaker ADCs there, but I think that the Steelback he didn't really need to be replaced, like he did show up. He was weak, but he showed up, and one split is not enough time for me to tell you that he's a dedicated. He's dedicated, and he'll grow because I saw growth already, and
Yeah.
so why is he being replaced now?
My question is that do you think he will, like, do you think that he's created enough of a portfolio to really find a team? Or do you think that he has kind of like, I would say, gone into the Pushu level in which he'll might just fizzle out?
I know he will find a team.
Mm-hmm.
I know that he had offers,
Mm-hmm.
and names like Roccat, Gambit were both being thrown around as options. I mean, most famously, Gambit had the choice between Steelback and Forgiven,
Oh yeah.
and I think we haven't seen the last of him. The key for Steelback will be to find another strong support.
Oh yeah.
And this is always a
Yeah.
problem for janitor ADCs. If you're a janitor ADC and you don't find a strong support or a strong jungler with solo lanes, a good example of that would be, I was going to use IG, but not really because their bot lane's pretty good actually. But
Yeah.
Mm.
but if you don't have a strong, maybe world elite,
I would say World Wing.
if you don't have a strong support and you're a janitor ADC, like you have to have the top half of your map be strong.
Yeah.
So I think that I don't think we've seen the last of him, but it'll be hard for him to find a place on a team as good as Fnatic.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Fnatic gave him enough of a chance to shine.
No, it was only one split. And they won that split, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty. I think that's enough for the Fnatic SKT thing. What about EDG versus HQ? It was pretty
Really
exciting for the
one-sided.
first two games, and then the third game, it's kind of stumped. But was there anything special at all about this, or was it pretty straightforward?
Well, I
This was
think-
the game I was really looking forward to. Like I was like, come on, Fnatic SKT, like get over with so I can watch.
Oh, I wanted to watch HQ EDG. I mean,
Yeah.
EDG HQ. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really looking forward to it because at some point, like even though the games were hyped for Fnatic and SKT, I really wanted to see how AHQ was. I like as in a best of five specifically.
Because they looked really strong at the group stages.
And I don't watch LMS. I don't. And I see like I've seen the scores and I've heard about their run through the playoffs
the
in which they
run through
beat.
playoffs was amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like they actually just completely. I would like to say that they pulled a Najin sword,
White Shield.
White
Najin
Shield, White Shield.
White Shield.
That was the name.
Yeah.
Yeah, White Shield was it. Yeah, and they just completely they beat teams in which they I guess they shouldn't have, but they were a lot stronger. They grew. And then they came here and they faced. I mean, they did well in the group stages as well, and then they went up against EDG and
And I don't know what the hell.
But I think it's
Yeah.
like it's one of those things where, and I know other people have pointed out that EDG actually scrims against
mm,
HQ
Yeah.
and some of the LMS teams, but like specifically HQ. And it's like if you look at the way EDG played in this set, and you look at the way HQ played, EDG is going to win that matchup 9 out of 10 times because it's almost exactly the same play style. And EDG can play differently. HQ didn't show me anything from this weekend that makes me believe that they can play differently than they did, but I really liked watching them play because they are really confident. They are like hyper aggressive. And they were all through playoffs too. That's kind of what set like their opponents off guard.
mhm.
And it's not just because previously watching this team last year, it was, and like you could totally have the narrative like, oh, HQ, like they took that game off of EDG last year, right, at Worlds, with like that crazy green tea hook. And one of the roster swaps that happened on HQ was that green tea actually stepped into like a coaching position, I believe, and then they put Mountain in the jungle and Albus at support. And they just looked really decisive but messy. And if you're going up against a team like EDG that can do that, but like 100 times better, obviously you're going to end up with EDG winning that match. Although I don't think EDG looked particularly like awesome in these games. And I know like Aaron said afterwards, he's like, oh, like these were, you know, like they have no macro strategy, and this is why China will still be behind Korea when it gets to the world stage. Like, I feel like he was thinking of these matches and just being like, "What are you doing? Why are you diving that turret? Please
Yeah.
stop!" But they were really fun to watch, and I was honestly super impressed with HQ's showing. Like, and if they continue scrimming against Chinese and Korean teams, then LMS will only continue to improve because their proximity is actually great for it. So
One thing I've always been really, I wouldn't say afraid of, but I've always been interested in. I feel like this is an LPL thing. Specifically with EDG, they always like they test their enemies a lot and seeing what they would contest. Like, oh, are they going to contest this dragon? Are they going to like? Are they going to protect this tower? Is this diveable? They always look for something like that, and so game ones always kind of feel a little bit because it feels a little bit messy in that sense, and so that's why I always feel like the games always end a lot quicker. Always end a lot quicker, especially in the LPL with certain teams, because if they realize a team will just kind of let them take a tower, why not dive it? Like that's always been a question, and so
or in the case of HQ, you have them contending for objectives like they really shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So then EDG is like, okay, like we'll just take this team fight.
Yeah.
Like it's very disadvantageous for you.
Mhm. So they always test their limits, and if they, I guess if they see someone testing theirs, it's like, no, we know you can't do that. Yeah. Like I don't know, I lost a lot of interest in that series. I guess the moment I going
Halfway
into the
through.
series, I was interested. I was really interested in watching it, but coming at it like midway through, I was like,
The last game was just
I actually think I fell
Yeah.
asleep halfway through the second game, and then I woke up at the end of the third game. And I'm just like, this is okay. I got excited for no reason. I'm sad now.
So one of my I used to work in LMS actually, and one of my big criticisms of AHQ has always been Westor, and he really did step up, and On really did step up their level of play over the last 6 months, and I think that Westor really did pretty well in the group stages. But the same storyline always emerges around Westor in particular. Which is the reason why I'm so critical of them, is that sure, they can do well for 2 or 3 weeks, like when there's a gauntlet in the finals or, at a group stage in a tournament, but then the next week, like, they're back to feeding, and especially Westor, and we saw this in this tournament where in the group stage he played fine, he did well, he carried some games, On carried some games, and then versus EDG, game 3, Westor is like out in left field somewhere, like like wearing sunglasses and drinking a Coke. Like I don't know, like
yeah, consistency, and I feel like the one big thing I want to talk about, I really want to talk about LMS as a whole, in the sense that one thing that you'll have two sides of a coin here. One, people saying, well, look at LMS. Like, look at either AHQ or look at Yowie Flash Wolves or TPA. Wow, like they really showed up. Or B, they either say you can't continue to say that when they are consistently playing to that level in international play. And it all really comes down to viewership of the region. There isn't like any outside viewership. There's no English stream. Like getting people to watch it. Like I know it's gonna be at an ungodly hour, but like China,
And
Korea,
they're
like,
both at ungodly hours. It's not really the
like
best excuse. For
that
people who are interested.
excuse. It doesn't exist. That's true. And so there just needs to be an English casting, and if that isn't, like, I don't know, it just needs to be a case that needs to, like, it has to happen, or at least the same narrative is going to continue on, in which people will either be downgraded, like degrading a region, not even degrading, downgrading a region, like, and its potential, or they will be like overhyping it. And so that people just don't, if they don't understand the region, then there's no way to really rate them, or at least have a proper rating in the eyes of the audience. And so that's an issue I have. I know I've always had that struggle in which I'm like, okay, I'm gonna watch LMS this season, and I watch a few games, and sometimes, yeah, I regret that decision, and sometimes
it was really top heavy in my opinion this season. It was
It is.
It's
basically
usually
like
top heavy in LMS.
it was
though.
basically like HQ didn't come out until the very end. It was basically
TPA.
Yowie Flash Wolves,
Mhm.
TPA, and then Hong Kong Esports kind of like hovering. And actually the reason why I started watching some games from LMS is because one of my favorite support players, who is actually Korean, who used to be on Pain Gaming in Brazil, moved to Hong Kong Esports, and his name's Ala, and
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
just a fantastic person.
Yeah.
If you ever watch his stream, he's like the cutest kid, and he's super nice. And his like Portuguese lessons were hilarious to watch, because that's
I
what
remember
he do
you
like
licking me a ton.
in
once.
between, like his like long queue times. He'd just be sitting there doing Portuguese. But I watched Hong Kong Esports, and the rest of the teams were kind of below their level, and even Hong Kong, they had some issues in terms of just like jungle support rotations and stuff like that. But I mean, they really like I know I'm like the biggest champion of Brazil, but like I agree. Like before Brazil, like get elements in English cast.
Yeah, that's
please.
just the
like
thing.
like
Yeah.
they won season 2, and like do I think you can sit back and say, oh, LMS is good because they won season 2? No, that's a dumb argument. And if you're using that argument, you're dumb. But the thing is, they're hovering between like major and minor region in people's minds, and when people think of that, they think of like, okay, when they try to think of where LMS is, they either bump them all the way down into like international wildcard status, which I like for one, until I started watching it and went back and watched the games and the VODs, like I was one of those people, I'll admit that. And then you bump them way up, and like you said, you overhype them, and you're like, okay, yeah, they're totally going to be able to take EDG to 5 games, and like that also plays into the misunderstanding of how good people think China is, because regular season in China is kind of crazy and weird. So, I mean, please just get them in English cast so people can watch, or at least like have the VODs to watch. Because even the VODs for me were kind of actually difficult to find. So,
And it just comes down to this, and it's if you're going to give a seed to a region, like for instance, you've given a seed to NA, you give it to an EU, obviously, that like it's like
China,
the core
Korea.
Korea, China, and they all have the English coverage, obviously. You can create that narrative, you can build up that hype, and of course, if you're going to give it to LMS, and not give them a narrative, not give them coverage, and you're going to be bringing them to these tournaments consistently, like I'm not saying that they shouldn't be given the seed. I'm saying that's perfectly fine, but if you're going to do that, you need to be able to cover them properly. You need to be able to put them out there. You need to be able to promote the region. If you're giving a region a seed, if you're going to constantly bring them in, and your audience doesn't even know what these teams are, who the hell are the Gamma Bears? A lot of people didn't. They were like, oh, then that's a nice logo you have there. Like
no one even looked at the logo. They just looked at Steak and they're like, oh, he's Scara, which I find offensive, by the way. But
that's just a major issue I have. If you're gonna bring a team in, promote them. Promote the region so you can create the storyline, so you can actually have some interest in these games. There's no interest because they see these teams and they're like, that's gonna be a stomp. And it's not a stomp.
And then
like,
suddenly everyone loves AHQ. Like, I can't tell you how many people in my Twitter feed were like, whoa, AHQ, like AHQ, AHQ. Like, even because, like, because I cover Brazil, like, half my Twitter feed's in Portuguese, and even all the Portuguese players like, whoa, like, Ziv's Nor is really good. Like, like you know.
Okay, I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Okay, so the counter argument to this is that China didn't even get coverage until this year, right? And they've been consistently dominant near the top since they've been in the World Tournament, so that's season 2, because they weren't in season 1. And then, even though TPA won season 2, and they've had TPA players interviewed a bunch of times, like, All Stars, twice had his moment at All Stars in season 3. They had Mistake, I think it was, in that Worlds documentary last year. So it's clear that they're paying attention to them, but I don't think they're giving them coverage until they see how well China's coverage does.
See, here's the problem with that. Here's this is a great counter argument to have, but it dies in that if you're not going to have the resources, obviously, to cover these regions, that's completely fine. Like that's okay. Like, you can use your resources for obviously China, because it's like, but China had coverage. It did.
They did.
And people were fine with it. Like, you can create that narrative, you can hire those people, etc., etc. There was always English coverage. The issue is when you deny that coverage from ever happening to begin with. If you can't do it yourself, allow people to make that story for you, and so you can use that. But if it doesn't, like, if you're denying that, then suddenly you're like, okay, well, it almost feels like they're really hoping that a single Taiwanese team does consistently well. You know what I mean? Like for instance, if Taipei Assassin just keeps going to world of international events, it's easy to create a storyline for them because people see them more often.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're just
But-
crossing their fingers now that HQ makes worlds, so they
Yeah.
can just tie in their
Exactly.
performance
It's easy to tie that in. But if a new Taiwanese team keep coming in, like first Taipei Assassins and Yoi Flash
here. Hong
Wolf,
Kong
Gamma
Esports,
Bears,
come on.
Gamma Bears, Yoi
Come on,
Flash
I
Wolves.
need the Vietnamese
Come on,
team to take it
Elmer.
over them now.
Exactly. If there's a new team every time, you're like, okay, I guess we're gonna have to start from scratch. Like there's because no team, like none of our audience is gonna know who they are. It's just I don't know. That's just something rant for me.
No, I think that's pretty fair.
Mhm.
Especially, it's just it's a whole topic for later. But like narratives is a big thing that needs to be handled with more care. So okay, so other than that's the semifinals wrapped up. All right, we got through that part. Now let's talk about the real game. SKT versus EDG.
Woo.
What were our initial predictions, all of us, going into this series? Raz?
I had it actually 3-1 for EDG. The number is
3-1 for EDG.
insignificant to be obvious. I just felt like EDG would take it. Based on I thought SKT as a whole probably had a lot. Their team play was great, but I thought they were really reliant on the lanes, and not too reliant, but more so than EDG. I remember having this discussion. Me and Emily remember this having discussion about Marin as a whole, and I remember this was the first time even like I felt like thought to myself, how does Marin his play style really correlate how do you weigh it to Koro's playstyle? I was like, well, he centers his gameplay around team play. Well, Marin really, I wouldn't say that he relies on it, but he's generally based on his laning.
Marin can't like Koro because of the way he like I'll interject and say Koro because of the way he came into the league, because of his role on EDG previously, he really learned how to do a lot with a little. Like they kind of were just like, okay, it's okay if you lose lane, we're gonna have you zone and do this, and like that's okay. And you know, that was his role on the team. He was never gonna be this kind of like beast that stomped lane. That actually only started happening this year. Like the Koro you saw here is not the Koro who went to Worlds last year, is not the Koro who played in LPL last year. But Marin, I feel like his team, like when he was on SKTS, they kind of tried to give him the resources, and then they couldn't put it together. So it became a team that really revolved more around EasyHoon in the mid lane. And so Marin was just kind of someone who I think he relies a little bit more on resources from the lane. So he relies more on winning lane to do what he wants to do in team fights. Whereas Koro kind of just has always been taught how to make those team fights happen with him in the team, if that makes sense.
So what was your prediction for this series?
My prediction for the series was
SKT, right?
SKT in 5, I believe. It was either SKT in 4 or SKT in 5. I think it was 5, though. I think I said it was going to
I
go
think
to
you
5
said
games.
5. All right, what about you, Hermit? What did you think?
My prediction was based on a flawed assumption that I had made.
Yeah.
But I believed that SKT, if they started EasyHoon, would have an easy trip, and because I didn't really have a good understanding of Faker's champion pool, which was kind of really evaluated in the last 3 games of the set. But what ended up coming out is I think that if SKT had played Faker from the beginning, they would have probably won this set, actually. I don't necessarily believe that the win that they got with EasyHoon, they wouldn't have gotten it with Faker. And because one of the things that came out over the course of this tournament was that they actually share a lot of champions, and Faker is even, similarly as good as EasyHoon on Azir, for example. So I just kind of question their decision to go with EasyHoon in the first 2 games, and because having seen it. But I predicted SKT in 5 if they started Easy Hoon, and if they started Faker, I said they would lose.
Okay.
I disagree slightly with that because I do think that Easy Hoon helped them in their win. Like I think Easy Hoon kept Pawn from doing what he wanted to do in that game. But aside from that, after game 2, I have no idea why they didn't put Faker in. And additionally, why they put Easy Hoon on Lulu instead of just swapping Faker in and putting Faker on Lulu. Like
Yeah.
that
was a questionable
decision
one.
to me, like that was the turning point. So when I'm watching the series, I'm like, okay, 2 games with Easy Hoon. That's fine. They lost the second game. Time to bring Faker in. Time to change up your strategy. And there's
They did
Easy
do that.
Hoon. And then he played Lulu on top of it. Like I was just like, that is when I knew that like SKT was probably going to lose the series, because I was like, that just shows that's a really weird decision for me.
I think
Based on those 2 players and based on
Yeah.
what SKT kind of set up. Because previously, like if you watch the CJ Enta series, for example,
Yeah.
as soon as they have to swap a player, they do. So
Yeah.
like Easy Hoon's in for the first game, he's out by the second. Tom's out by the third. And then they win the series. And I feel like they misjudged when to
When to
take
switch.
Easy Hoon out of the series. And I don't know why that happened, because they seemed to have a pretty good grasp on it going into this tournament.
Yeah,
Like I
and
said,
that-
I was actually not surprised at all that they played Faker throughout the Fnatic series. I thought that was perfect, because I don't
That
think
kinda-
Easy Hoon would have helped them there.
that kind of brings up one of the kind of stories we wanted to talk about in terms of Coma versus Aaron and the mental mind game that was going on in Champ Select and in team composition choice. But I think this is also an adept time to talk about Tom versus
Easy Hoon.
Easy Hoon
Yeah, I
versus
actually wanted to
Faker.
bring that one up sooner because we're talking about the decision to when to swap in Faker and Easy Hoon, right? So the hypothetical is, what if they had brought Tom as the sub? Do you think the series would have been like significantly different, or?
If they brought Tom as the sub, it's hard to tell. I mean, he could have performed like Mako, where he just is suddenly like, whoa, destroying. Because like you saw him in the GE Tigers series, and you saw him in similar series in the regular season, and he just was aggressive early, and he had more creative pathing. And then you watch his games in the CJ Enta series, and he looks super lost and confused, and is messing up all these ganks, and his skirmishes are terrible, and his Gragas positioning is awful. And I don't know, because it's always really difficult to tell. So
Okay.
I like went on this similar rant on China Talk, so Raz is probably like, oh my gosh, shut up about it already. But like,
I love your
like I don't disagree with the decision, but I do disagree with the oh my gosh, like inequity of having your domestic region be defined by having multiple subs and your international competition being defined by only having one.
One.
So if
Yeah.
you're going to try to make the transition for these teams to have multiple subs, to be able to have rotating rosters, and like I can't say whether I'm honestly still a huge fan of it. Like I wasn't at first. Like I was a huge like, oh my gosh, this sucks. Bring back sister teams. I hate this. But I feel like if you look at SKT's development throughout the season, if you look at what they've tried to do, if you look at their pick bans, if you look at when they decide to play Faker and Easyhoon, you do see a pattern develop, and you see that they were preparing for this. And I'm not going to say if they had Tom, they would have won, because I don't think it's as easy to, I don't think it's as easy as that. I really don't. I honestly think, like, now taking into consideration SKT's performance here, their performance in Korea, like EDG at this moment is the better team, like just straight up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't think that Tom would have made a difference. But I do think that if you're going to have an international competition and you're encouraging regions, like China's kind of always done it, but it's been more to, oh my gosh, like you suck or something happened, we're going to replace you randomly for no reason.
Or just like to really like show that they don't give
yeah.
a fuck about a game.
Yeah, like we have 10 players, let's play them all. Like Do
Let's
it.
play our former AD carry as our
Yeah.
top laner. You're like, okay, well, all right.
Like, but you know, the OMG aside, like
That's a whole
if you're
other
gonna be
can of
having,
worms.
if you're gonna be having, they are. If you're going to be having these teams developing strategies around multiple subs, then you need to allow them to take that to international tournaments.
Yeah.
Because there was a decision that had to be made. Do we take EasyHoon and do we take Tom? And do I disagree with the decision to take EasyHoon? No, I don't, because I think you develop really specific strategies around each of those mid laners.
But you don't
However,
develop that same level of strategy depth with Tom, is what you're saying.
I think in this particular meta, and because of what Bengi was able to do in the CJ Entis series, like, I mean, remember they played Tom in the finals, and from what the kind of like buzz around it was, and like interviewing the players prior to the game, and that like little stupid like trash talk segment they had where they're like, "Bengi, we're gonna make you the ultimate toilet," that kind of thing. Tom said he's like, I'm really comfortable against Lee. Like, I feel like I have his number. And if you have a player like that and you have him going into a series, like, why wouldn't you play him? Because he says, I have this jungler's number. I can own him. And guess what? Tom totally owned Lee in those games, and they swept. In the CJ Entis series, it was different. Tom looked like he had nerves, so they just swapped him out, and Bengi, the ever sturdy, you know, Bengi that he is, he kind of just does his thing, and they end up winning. I guess I just don't like the fact that they were forced to choose. Do I think it would win them the series, though? No. EDG was definitely the better team.
Alright, I think that's really, really fair. Especially because we had this whole segment on Tom and EasyHoon like 2 weeks ago, I think? Or was it just last week?
Where I actually had to give Bengi credit.
Yeah,
For something.
you were not looking forward to that.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to the end of this to MSI to really gauge how I felt about rotating rosters specifically, and honestly, and I just like obviously like I was wanting to gauge the strength of regions like China, but I wanted to gauge how rotating rosters worked in the best of situations. Like SKT is the best team in the world in how they use rotating roster. There's none better. LG, like, no one's gonna talk about it, like Najin or something, but LGD was
God.
the next runner-up, and I even felt that it was insignificant with LGD.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it's because
it-
Acorn and Flame play the same champions.
they play the same champions, and the same thing actually came down to SKT in the end, and that was what I was the most disheartened about, was that the biggest real issue was that they had different pools, and that's never an issue. Like, there's, especially when you always come into a meta in which there's like always just 3 rotating mid laners or 4 rotating mid laners. It's like, okay, so apparently they both play Azir. I think EasyHoon has the
Better
LeBlanc. EasyHoon, I don't know. I would say EasyHoon has the Cassiopeia pick, while Faker has the LeBlanc pick. But I feel like
EasyHoon has
Mhm.
Cassiopeia and Ziggs and Xerath and Karthus that I would rate above Faker's, but that's about it. Like, they're really specific picks. Because I think their Azirs are comparable, but I think they play differently. So that's really hard to evaluate for me.
And so for me, it comes down to, after looking at that, I don't think I can justify like rotating rosters. Like, having subs is completely fine if you feel like someone isn't playing well and their mentality is starting to drain away, then you can put them in. But when it comes down to playstyles and champion picks, I don't see it. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm not open-minded about it.
I don't necessarily think you're not open-minded about it. I think it's just because it's so new to competitive league.
So, I have a few words to say about this that we can kind of use to transition into talking about Aaron and Coma.
Okay.
I'm not a big Coma fan, and I sometimes get a lot of shit for this because there are a lot of people who really like Coma, and I don't want to. I don't want to shit talk what he's done for SKT, because I think that having a person in his role doing what he's doing is going to be good for an organization, whether or not they make the kind of some repeated bad decisions in terms of strategy. For me particularly, I really doubt that Koma's pick ban philosophy, and I have a lot of questions, and I've had them all season about SKT's pick ban, from blind pick Xerath to LeBlanc in the finals. It's just it goes on and on and on. So for Koma, for me, the first time I really started to respect what he was doing on a level above, kind of like put him up there with one of the coaches that I'm kind of studying, was when was coming into the GE Tiger series, when it was announced that he was going back going back to the Easyhoon and Tom roster.
Mm-hmm.
And what that really signaled to me is that he looked at the CJ Entus series. He saw that Easyhoon and Tom had these mentality issues we talked about. They were taken out. He brought in Faker and Bengi. They won the series. Now, if he had chosen to go with Faker and Bengi in the G Tiger series, that would have been a failure in my eyes. Like I feel like going with Easyhoon and Tom shows that he really has a good handle on how this role swapping, or not role swapping, but kind of subbing extended, thing works, and how to play it. And I felt like those two series, CJ Entus and G Tigers, showed to me that Koma had something special. He had kind of figured out how to take it to the next level. You're always trying to figure out how to add folds to your gameplay. And this is kind of like this huge fold. Like, nobody's doing this kind of shit, really. Like, nobody has, two players that they just sub, like, and are doing it effectively in terms of thinking about team strategy. And so I gave Koma a lot of props going into MSI. What came out of MSI for me in terms of this Aaron versus Koma question is that Aaron has his finger on the pulse of EDG, and that is the most important thing, to know your team's health, what your team needs, and I just believe that Aaron kind of ran circles around Koma in the finals for sure. Like, I mean, especially Game 5. We talked to the LeBlanc pick is just this huge moment where you have SKT. Game 5, Faker's on the stage, LeBlanc's open, they pick it. Everybody is expecting it, and I talked a little bit about this in the pre-show with you guys, but when you have a moment like that as a team, or you have these kind of like trademarks as a team, it just gives other teams the ability to put you into that situation where you think you're getting everything you want, and then they turn it around on you, and it's everything bad for you.
And I think... Oh.
Go ahead.
I was just going to compare the use of Faker's LeBlanc against Clearlove's Evelynn, because I feel like if you look at the history of when Clearlove decides to play Evelynn, and you should read Kelsey Mosier's article about it on the story, because it's fantastic. But basically, you have these two star players, very well respected within their regions. Faker's widely known as one of the best players in the world. And their inner, personal narratives going into a Game 5. Faker is going to play LeBlanc. And you listen to, and we can get into the comms, because I think the comms are super interesting, like the mic check that they released about the comms going into Game 5 and throughout Game 5. And you have Koma, and Faker hovers the Lulu, and then he hovers the LeBlanc. And Koma basically says, Like if you're confident, like go for it. Like just play your heart out. Like do your best. Don't leave, basically like don't leave anything on the table. I forget what he exactly says, but it's something
Play
along
without
the lines of
regrets.
that. Just like there you go. Play without regrets. Same thing. Very like sports narrative, right? Like Faker's gonna carry us on LeBlanc. That's what he does in Game 5. That's what happens. We're SK Telecom. We're doing this. Bangy's on Nunu. Martin's on Nar. Bangs on Urgot, which is like okay, but
Immediately downplay
then
the
you have
Urgot.
exactly, and then you have the other team, and you have Clear Love, and Clear Love is playing Evelyn, and for most people, they're probably looking at this and they're like, "What the fuck, Evelyn? Like that's just crazy and dumb and weird, and why are you doing this? You like blah." But you find that he picks this champion in very specific, important matches. And this is a specific, important match, and therefore, Clear Love is going to play Evelyn.
What
And
was
I think
the undefeated records for both? I think for Faker it was like
for
10?
Clear Love, it wasn't about like defeat. I think he has like a 66% win rate or something on it.
I thought I heard it was something else. I'm sorry. I must have remembered wrong then. I thought he was undefeated.
Well, because the thing about Clear Love, it's not.
Deft is undefeated on
Yeah,
Jinx.
Deft is
undefeated.
undefeated on Jinx. That's what
Yeah.
it
The
was.
thing
My
with
bad. I
Clear Love,
confused that.
it's not like a bunch of things that you can point to and say like, oh yeah, it's these stats and blah blah blah. Like, no, it's just a champion that he picks in really like large matches, like large important matches, and that's when he brings it out. And I thought it was great that he brought it out in this match, and I think they had a really good answer for the LeBlanc pick with the Morgana. I thought Pawn played really well. I mean, Pawn in general had like kind of a weird tournament for me, to be honest. I don't think he was like all that great. I also think that he all showed that he could play a little bit differently than he had during the LPL season, which is interesting. Like he took a step back into a similar role that he played on Samsung White, rather than being this kind of wackadoo, like randomly roaming around the map and like making people chase him wherever. So that was interesting too. It was interesting that EDG just showed a completely different, like very calm, precise, I guess, mindset going into that 5th game. They knew the LeBlanc was coming. They picked for it perfectly, and then they executed what they had to do.
I think one sad thing going into that, well, not sad for me, but one sad thing coming
Sad
into
for the
that
SKT fans.
for SKT is the culture and mindset that really got into Game 5. It really, really, really showed in Mike Check when he said, well, he made an off-comment joke in the sense that, like, me, Bengi, and Faker have never lost the best of 5. Like, when we
So we're
got
gonna
to
get
the
a
finals.
blessing.
Yeah, and it's not even just that. It comes down to the entire idea that play your best champ. Just play what you're best at and go in with your strategy. And that works really well in blind pick. That works really well in blind pick. And especially they were on blue side as well, by the way. And so they go with that strategy, and like that's all. Like that's every game 5 they've played in their region. You really lose out, or at least the mentality is closed out to you of counterplay. Because counterplay, especially when the enemy team has purple side, and in China, you go to game 5, who the fuck, like, that doesn't matter. You play the same game consistently from game 1 to game 5.
It's the same.
You always think about the counter matchup. You always think about what the enemy will play, what your response is. That doesn't change. That mentality doesn't change. And so EDG has been through this before. I love pointing to the mic check because that's actually the most beautiful thing that like we've ever gotten to see in that sense. But like they point out, like the players point out that hey, we beat World Elite, we beat LGD. Now we're gonna beat SKT, and if you look back at how they beat World Elite, how they beat LGD, the game 5s have always been, or at least the pick bans in general, have always been interesting. It's always been it comes down to what
Yeah.
they're best at, and also how those picks and those players counteract the enemy team. They always think about the counterplay. They're always intelligent when it comes down to that. But I guess Korea usually gets they get the free ticket of like when it comes to being like really getting counterplay or really thinking about game 5. There's no intelligence when it comes to game 5. It's literally it's blind pick everybody. Everybody loves blind pick because it's fun. Like that's what it is. And you pick your best composition, like because usually someone
With your
picks.
best champions.
I know, with
yeah.
your best champions, because usually it's banned. Like you get that freedom to use your best compositions, and that's not gonna happen in international play. And I love that we saw that in game 5. It's sad for SKT, but like they have to learn that now, I guess.
I want to piggyback a little bit on this because this is a discussion that Raz and I had a couple days before MSI actually began. Talking about Eve. So I've been trying to work Eve a little bit into the strategy of the team, and one of the main reasons why I have is because of the Nunu matchup. And if you think about Nunu as a champion in the history of Nunu, he's always kind of been second tier. You know, he's always around. He's never out of the meta all the way. And especially for really dominant, intelligent junglers like Clear Love, I guess, Dandy, you know, anybody who's at the top of their game within a region.
Bengi
Bengi.
still plays. I wouldn't put him up
Yeah,
there with Clear Love and Dandy, but that's just me.
But anybody who's at the top of their game within a region plays Nunu. And one of the, I guess it's a new change, but the change to Evelynn that made her speed boost remove slows. Maybe it's a couple of years old. I don't know. I'm sorry. I've played this game so long. Whatever. But so the change to Evelynn's speed boost that made her remove slows, it made her into this really interesting matchup interaction between Evelynn and Nunu. And also another thing about Nunu is that the matchup with Sivir in terms of the ADC triumvirate that we see right now between Kalista, Urgot, Sivir, and then to a lesser extent Lucian. Sivir has the best matchup versus Nunu because she can spell shield his snowball.
Yeah.
And Sivir Eve is a great synergistic engage composition where you have a invisible tank that gets a speed boost, lays down a huge AoE slow, and then you got a team fight. So there are a lot of like factors in terms of thinking about how, like what SKT is gonna lay their money on, and ways that EDG can favorably play to that based on their all their strengths that they have already. The Sivir pick, Def's because Def got a pentakill. The Eve pick, yeah. So,
Okay.
and so and well, I was going to say one more wrinkle. The thing about Eve versus Nunu, not only is it about the slow, but it's also about Nunu can invade Eve without having a lot of information. And generally, it's really bad for Nunu to try and get that information. And so the Eve has to screw up for Nunu to get the information he needs to properly press the advantages he has in the early game. But yeah.
That's that's a really, really good point.
Okay. All right, I think that's a pretty big chunk we've dedicated to the finals. Is there anything else we missed before I move forward?
I don't think so. actually.
All right, so let's wrap up the MSI discussion with the narratives going after MSI. So we've gone in with the narrative, you know, TSM was supposed to be really good, and then Fnatic was like, you know, behind them, but you know they're exciting, and then the narratives for the East. Well, we already kind of discussed there wasn't really one for LMS, which is unfortunate. SKT was expected to take the whole thing, and they didn't. EDG, the focus is completely focused on the Korean imports, which was, a big discussion to have. But I think it's pretty unfair to discount the efforts and the skill by the Chinese players on EDG. So, what are the narratives moving forward?
Pay attention to Koro and Mako.
And
Yeah.
Kirillov, guys won like
Um,
23 titles.
I mean,
23?
I guess like
23.
Yeah.
I guess
23.
my frustration with the narratives surrounding international tournaments is like they're all the same, and Raz kind of touched upon it earlier with the LMS one kind of being like, oh my gosh, we have no idea who this team is, and if it's AHQ, well then we know that Westdoor is on the team. So, there's one piece of information out of the way that we can talk about. And then the other.
When will
lot of-
LMS like get away from permanent underdogs status? is
Yeah,
my
I don't
question.
know. They still might never, regardless of how good they are or not. I think I guess I'm just sick of like the East versus West narrative, to be honest. Like I'd rather people actually focus on like, hey, like look at Koro's performance on EDG and how he helps dictate their team fights and like how he's grown from last season. Like that's a really great story. Look at Mako. He's a rookie and he's on like an international stage after his first split. He didn't even play in the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
Look at like SKT. Look at their rotating roster. What have they done? Like don't just look at them as like, oh man, it's SK Telecom again and they're Korean robots and they're gonna like sweep the series, obviously, because that's what Koreans do. They just stomp, and then it's NA and EU fighting for third place or whatever, because everyone forgets LMS exists. And like I'm over exaggerating, but
I mean,
I just want to like have a call out to all the writers out there, like try a little
You
harder
can do it.
to
yeah.
research other teams and other scenarios and learn about them, because like I cover Brazil and no one gives a fuck about Brazil and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because the players themselves are awesome.
Yeah.
Like every single player I've been able to talk to is just an amazing person and I owe them so much and I love them all. Like they're all super cool people and they're fighting to try to play this game. And so like I guess in terms of like the international wild card, they always have the narrative of like, well, they're obviously not going to perform, so they're here to have fun and learn
God, I
things.
hate that
and like,
narrative so much.
while that is true, because it is really difficult to be in a wild card region and not to be exposed to that level of competition. Like you can look at it, like a ton of players. In fact, some of the Brazilian players I started talking to before I even started talking in Brazil, I was just chatting to them about OGN because we were both watching it at the same time. Like it's not that they don't watch, like we all watch. Does that mean I can go in and execute strategy? Like
Yeah.
no, I couldn't be an analyst or a coach. Like I don't think I could. So I mean it's just, and then actually playing the game on that level, like of course you want to be exposed to those kind of things, but like I don't know, I'm just frustrated. And I guess that's my rant. Like I see the same narrative I see the same narratives by region for every single international tournament.
Yep.
Okay, I'm done. You can tell me.
do you guys hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, good. My Skype just randomly just pooped on me. But anyways, yeah, that's 100% the case. But I don't think that's ever gonna happen. like just watching StarCraft is forever gonna be foreigner versus Korean. So just gotta live with it. That's just life.
It's really unfortunate for all the other wildcard regions as well. They won't get the fair
But
coverage.
they're just wild card regions.
all the wild cards.
Well, I mean, because like I tried to cover Japan for a
Maybe
while.
they'll
But, like
take
every
a
time I
game
try to
off
talk
the
about
line.
Japan, people are like, "Oh yeah, so when's the league anime coming?" I'm like, I fucking hate you so much. So it's so unfair. But that's really kind of a digression and a different rant. I'm not gonna spew out on the show. So I think we've pretty much talked about everything that
But
was.
more international tournaments. More
Yeah,
international
we need more
tournaments
international
and
tournaments.
better
We're getting
narrative.
the fun all stars at the end of the year. That's not really an international tournament. Though. We need more international tournaments, and they need to be better organized to the point where one region isn't like completely screwed in terms of preparation and flight time. I mean, I think last year wasn't China the one that got screwed for Worlds? Didn't they have their finals like really close to Worlds?
Yeah.
That's just the thing that happens, though. Yeah, it's just it didn't happen this time. Oh, not as bad as
Not
this.
as bad
I
as last
feel
time.
like
though.
every Chinese fan is just like with like INTZ going to the international wildcard, literally having like a day to prepare, like less than a day pretty much to prepare, and then like everyone's like, why are they playing so bad? Well, maybe because they haven't slept in 3 days. Like,
See, this is
and
just
then-
an issue that always rises up. I feel
Yeah.
like it's something people keep smashing their head against, and it's like, I mean, I know you want to have the finals at a massive stadium. Maybe I don't know if that's the problem or not, but give your team some time to be able to prep for final,
yeah, and like SK Telecom had what 3 days to get to the venue or something like that. Like they played their finals and then they had less than a week to get there.
Mhm.
And like yeah, actually there was a joking interview that came out where I think it was Marin, and he was saying it was either Marin or Easyhoon because they're the two like the two that people kind of talk to the most. And one of them said they were like, oh, it was Marin in a chat, like a translated
I
league
think I know what
chat.
you're talking. Yeah.
Yeah, where he said he basically is like, we learned you have to just follow what Bengi does because Bengi was the only one on that team with international experience. So you have these 4 players who are like have no idea how to deal with jet lag. And so after the first day, they just all started copying what Bengi did.
Oh my
Because he
god.
was the only one with experience. And I was just like, oh my god, like that has to be miserable.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
having to
anyway,
live your
yeah,
life like
it was
Benji,
from-
that's gotta suck.
I really think that this was a great tournament. Like in
Oh, yeah.
all things,
Oh, no, yeah,
in
it
all
was a good
things
tournament.
considered, like it's really good. I'm really glad that this tournament was as good as it was. I mean, we had a really interesting clash of regions. We came out with some really kind of interesting developments in terms of team strength, and I love that they implemented this from a coach and support staff perspective. I have some concerns about some of the solutions that for the wildcard regions, because for me, since Challengers Scene Finals, I've been on break, so it's just it's we do scrims every day, but it's not the regular season, and I think that there should be there's always been this problem of China being behind. Sorry,
Yeah.
I know. There's always been this problem of China being a couple patches behind, or finals on different weeks, like EU and NA. Their final we had they're just so spread out, all of this kind of stuff, and I think that there is a greater effort that can be made by the organizers of these tournaments to put teams on a level footing
Mhm.
without negatively impacting the schedules of everybody.
Yeah.
And you're gonna probably end up losing viewership for some of your events because of this. But if it results in more competitive events, that if the more important events are more competitive, then I think it's a good trade-off.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I don't give two shits about how many people watch NA and how many people watch EU, and if they have to be at the same time to maximize the efficiency of the time schedule leading into MSI, then I could care less. What I'm mostly concerned about is not handicapping teams going into an event like this. And while this wasn't such a huge offender of an event, the wildcard qualifier certainly was, and just having one team who had 3 weeks before the event versus another team that had 36 hours before the event, that's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. No way are those two teams going to be on the same footing at the beginning of the tournament.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's pretty fair to say I do agree with the that MSI was handled better. Especially like everyone gives Riot like 24/7 hours worth of flack for choosing Tallahassee. And this would be a problem that I guess could be solved if you planned way earlier in time, because people are saying, you know, it's money. It's not necessarily money. It's booking. You have to book it like way ahead of time. And I don't know when they started playing MSI, but like by the time they're planning MSI around this time of year, I don't know what kind of major city you're going to be able to get a 3 to 4 plus day reservation of a major arena like Madison Square Garden or anything, because NBA playoffs are going on right now. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, where else are we going to go? So, in terms of Tallahassee, whatever, suck it up. We got 4 days of competitive international tournament. You should be happy about that. Alright. If we have more of these, I think we'll be able to solve even better questions, like where regions stand, because one best of 5 doesn't always mean, you know, one team A is better than team B, right? So it's like, just take for example, LCS, OGN, LPL, whatever other leagues we have. They play over an entire season, and that's how we get a really good idea of who's at the top, who's at the bottom. You can't really do it at the international tournaments because you only get one tournament. So we need more. Right, listen to us. You need more good, well-organized tournaments, not like these third-party Chinese and Brazilian tournaments that I have to sit through.
Big Brother, right? We know
Oh
you're
God!
listening.
Please no third-party Chinese
please.
and Brazilian tournaments. Good Lord!
Like, let's not have that anymore. But
I
anyway,
thought China was bad, and then I watched Brazil. I watched XMA. Oh God!
so I think we've gotten a pretty good idea of what's going on, what happened to MSI, what was important, moving forward. Is there anything else that needed to be said over there on the show, in terms of what happened?
Cora's a better top player than Martin, and I told people so. That's what I said at the end of China Talk too. That was my shout out. Shout out to
I know.
Koro.
So I guess we're going right into shoutouts then. Is that your shoutout? Is that your only shoutout?
Shout out to Koro.
Shout
out
out
to
to Koro, and I guess shout out to LOL Esports. They employ me, so you know, it's good to have money.
All right.
Pretty solid shout out.
Hermit, got any good shoutouts?
Shout out to OG, Origin,
Original
boy,
Geekster.
Maurice, Stuke and Snyder, putting up with me every day. My boy Titus Hafner, telling me what to do. Let's get it, boys. Move into that house ASAP.
Awesome.
That's what I'm talking about.
All right, Razzle, your turn. Shoutouts, go.
Yay, shout outs. Shout out to Koro and the Chiefs. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the Chiefs. We're going into OPL. OPL starts 2 weeks from now.
I think 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, around that time. New split's gonna start. A lot of expectations. Expectations isn't to simply win OPL. It's to go to IWCI and to win, go to Worlds. So.
Alright, well,
Get 'em.
shoutouts to the panel for being awesome. Sorry we had to not do a live stream. I guess just internet stuff, whatever. It's been kind of weird last week anyway, with all the storming going on in the Midwest. So, by the time you hear this, it'll already be uploaded, but we'll try to get this uploaded as soon as we can. Also, shoutouts to Coach Aaron, which is why we picked this image for Hermit. For being awesome.
Yay.
Shoutouts to everyone else who works with Into the Rift. And that's pretty much it. Good night.
Night.